Parenting Teen Boys: How to Stay Connected and Manage Power Struggles, Part 2. Welcome back to the Mothers of Boys Survival Guide podcast. This is part 2 of my conversation with Casey O'Rourke of the Joyful Courage podcast. Our conversation with Casey was so impactful that we chose not to shorten it and instead split it into 2 episodes. In part 1, we talked about staying connected, reducing power struggles, and building influence during the teen years. Today, we dive into screens, privacy, vaping, and how to stay grounded when emotions run high. Let's jump in. My boys reacted very differently to stress. Ernest would just sort of spin inside and get super, super quiet. Exuberance would spin out and get energetic and very vocal. So what do you recommend for parents when they're in the middle of that chaos? And I will say, when my husband would suddenly interject himself, that was a whole nother male dynamic. When you have 3 men in your house, there is definitely some chest pounding that goes on. What do you suggest when all those emotions get high?
I mean, I think that first and foremost, you take care of yourself and you check in on your nervous system. When we are in fight or flight, which can look like that internal withdrawal or that external, we do not have access to our prefrontal cortex. We're in the in the emotional part of the brain, the limbic system.
Well, and the boys don't have all that much access to the prefrontal cortex anyway.
Teenagers don't. Yeah, boys I mean, that it's still in development. That's not developed in humans until late 20s.
Right.
So first and foremost, I think something that's really useful for parents to remember is everybody's heightened emotion is not the time for problem solving or reflecting. It's a time to tend to the nervous system. Tending to the nervous system, slowing your breath will trigger your heart rate to go down. Pulling your shoulders back opens your heart center. You just, like, the work of releasing the tension in your body, right, is first and foremost. And then you get to be very clear and say, hey, we got some stuff to work out. Let's all do what we need to do so that we can come back together and figure this out. Or if they're like, screw you, okay, great. I'm going to take care of myself. Let me know when you're ready. But I would also say, if this is a pattern that happens regularly, then outside of those moments, you get to circle up with your family and say, here's what I notice. I notice that we all get really worked up and we're screaming at each other and nothing gets solved and people get hurt and we feel bad about it later. Right? So how about we start to practice pausing when we're feeling that way, taking care of ourselves, and then coming back to solve problems. You can also have a conversation around, hey, child number 1, what helps you when you're feeling all overly, emotional? What helps you calm down? What about you, child number 2? What about you, partner? Here's what helps me. So you get to just normalize. I think this is so important, and God, doesn't the world need more of this right now? The most powerful thing that humans can learn to do is to recognize when they're dysregulated and take the time to regulate. Otherwise, we're spewing all sorts of hurtful things all across the land. We're in fear, and it's just not useful. It's just not useful. So yeah, that's how I would answer that question. Hope it was helpful. Self-regulation is
it's very helpful. Yeah, and it's tricky. It's all kind of tricky. And I would fight for that calmness the most when things were the scariest. When they're climbing out the window, they're experimenting with drugs and alcohol and sex, or
Sure, because every scenario ends dead in the ditch, right? So that catastrophizing is really real, and it is scary. They are making scary choices. They're driving too fast. They're hanging out with people that seem sketchy. That's the terrain, unfortunately.
Yeah. So I told, talk about some of those stories. There was a story when Exuberance, I get a phone call from the Pennsylvania State Police because he's just been pulled over doing 100 on the Pennsylvania Turnpike, or nicely called 98. And he was on his way to visit his brother. And I mean, my reaction to the police officer was scare him. Just scare him. I couldn't say, no, he couldn't possibly do that, or what are you doing? It's like, just scare him, because that's not acceptable.
I have a story. I was driving to see a colleague of mine, and we had just at the dinner table been talking about vaping, nicotine. And I knew it was something that there was some dabbling going on. And we had great conversations about it. And again, both my husband and I have our own stories about nicotine addiction. And, so anyway, we had this whole conversation, as we do. And I was on this drive, and I get a call from the high school principal saying, well, we've heard that that your child has been vaping in the bathroom. And I said, oh, great. Did you call her in? Because we're already talking about it at home. It'd be great for them to get some feedback from the school. And it was so interesting because I think that the principal, or the assistant principal, whoever it was really taken aback, because I wasn't, like you said, it wasn't like, not my kid, or it was really like, oh, we're a team, and we're all looking out for my kid. And thank you for letting me know. And please be sure to, echo the things that we talk about. But I also, with that same kiddo, realized after multiple experiences with the vape, I said to him, so listen, your relationship with nicotine is really up to you. I'm going to intervene and interfere and interrupt when I find out, or I see it, or I suspect it, but I have no control over whether or not you have a lifelong relationship with this thing that is a pain in the ass to quit. I said, if you talk to any grown person, over 30, who uses nicotine, they're going to tell you, I wish I never started. So I am handing over this responsibility to you, with the caveat of, I'm going to take it when I see it. And that was a big shift with it relationally for me and that child. But also, a month later, they came to me. They were sitting at the kitchen counter, and there was a vape on the counter. And they said, I need you to take this. I forgot that I had it, and I found it a couple days ago, and I started using it, and I can't stop. I need it to just go away. And it was one of those moments where it was like, this is the power of recognizing, like, this is up to you. This isn't a cat and mouse game. I think a lot of parents set up this, like, don't do it. If I catch you, you're in trouble. And it's like, okay, I got to sneak around. I got to avoid being caught, versus think about what you're doing to yourself. Think about, the potential consequences. Think about, what you ultimately want in, the most versus what you want in the moment. So yeah, that's one of I tell that story a lot, actually.
So, along with that is, some parents would, and I remember having conversations about this at the time, that they would consider it a violation of their kids' privacy to go looking through their room while they were at school to see if there was anything harmful in the room. And I, found drugs a couple of times. And when they would get home, I would have conversations with them, and I would pull it out and show them what I found. I called that period that I became a submarine parent. So instead of being a helicopter parent, which I just really wasn't capable of, I floated beneath the surface. I collected intelligence. I pinged locations. And on occasion, I had a full breach, right? And when they would come home, I didn't have that full breach. It was, what is this? Why are you doing this? Do you understand what the risks are? How do you feel about that privacy thing?
Yeah, I think it's really nuanced, and I think it can become really slippery. Um, I and one of the things, that I talked about with my kiddos was like, I'm, until you give me something, there was never any like, everything looked good. And so I'll just search around and see if there's really anything going on. I
Mhm.
personally don't do that.
Well, I didn't do it very often, but
Yeah.
I did.
Yeah, I'm not one that I didn't like search their phones or I mean we had phone limits, absolutely, and we very much normalized conversations around screen use and misuse and being used by screens and I mean we talked about that. And it's the same thing with substances and relationships. I mean, the conversations were what became really normalized. And, there were times more with my son. My daughter was very cagey, for a long time. Like I would walk in, and it's funny because I would walk in her room to say something, but I wouldn't look at her. It was so inside of me. I would just kind of, listeners, I'm like looking all over. I would just kind of look around, and it was so annoying to her. And and like I remember we were on a road trip recently and I was like, she said, "Oh, you pick she was driving. She's like, here's my phone, pick the music or whatever." And I said, "Oh my gosh, it's so interesting to me to think about how easygoing you are with me even touching your phone because there were so many years where, I couldn't get near it. It was just, and I was
Mhm.
like, "What were you doing?" She goes, "Mom, I wasn't doing anything. There was nothing shifty
Mhm.
going on my phone, but the idea of you going through it was too much," which is funny. But I think, I think if there are things coming up that are indicators that, something more is going on and your little
Mhm.
spidey senses are happening, then I do think it can be appropriate to poke around. Um, I also think it's important to say, "Hey, here's what I'm noticing, and I have I'm wondering about that. Like, tell me about what's going
Mhm.
on in your life, right? Tell me about how you're handling the stress of high school. I know that you're having a fallout with your friend group. Talk to me about that." So it's more important to me that we have those kinds of conversations than it is to kind of catch them. And that being said, it's funny, I found a whole shoebox in my college age son's room and last semester, and I opened it up and it was full of all sorts of contraband. And I took a picture of it and I was like, "What is this?" He's in college. And he was like, "Oh,
Yeah.
Mom, that is so old. I haven't even looked in that box." And we had this great conversation. And it opened the door for me to ask him, like, "So at college, like, how is your relationship with partying? What is that looking like right now? Are you noticing that it's hard to not go out some nights?" Like, I want him to be in reflection of, like, yeah, even when I have a test, but if my buddies are going out, it is hard. I want him to kind of be in that, recognize that tension and then ask him, like, "So what do you do? What helps you?" So that he again is developing that critical thinking for him to be like, "Yeah, what does help me?" Right. So it's more
Mhm.
at the forefront, more explicit than it is implicit. So that's my biggest focus.
And how do you, advise teen parents about all the technology that they're, confronted with
Yeah.
today? And, you know, last year we did a podcast on Minecraft and Roblox. Especially with teen boys, they can really get attached to the
Mm,
gaming platforms, and it can become a big part of their social for people like Ernest. He didn't have that aggressively friendly social side to him. So, it was important for him to be able to play and make a community online. But, how do you manage that
yeah.
balance without letting it run right over you?
Well, I think it's so interesting. I mean, when I think about for us as teenagers, I remember I wasn't like my parents were pretty strict about school, like weekdays. So
Hmm.
maybe, usually I had practice of some sort and maybe I'd get to like stop by a friend's house for an hour to hang out. And then I was home. And the phone was not allowed to ring after 9 o'clock. And we didn't have 2 lines. We had call waiting, but we didn't. So it
Right.
was like there was this expectation, there was containment, right? And then with video games, it's like we can't, like, all that containment goes out the window. And I think so. One of the things that we talked about with my kids when we talked about phones and video games and anything really is like you get to there's a curfew. Just like if you were out in the world, there would be a time where you're expected to come home. Video games, I will be being honest, we didn't have a big video game. There was like ebbs and flows with video games, but my son really craved out in the world, in person, play and interaction. Well, I mean, he still is that way.
Right.
So
Yeah, that's my second.
yeah.
Exuberance is like that,
Yeah. So really what I want to focus on with parents is how do we create digital wellness in our family? And,
No, I like that.
yeah, and really like reflecting on how does it make you feel? First of all, I think it's absolutely okay, parents, to say you get 3 hours on a Saturday or whatever, right? You get to create limits. Co-creating limits is even better. Talking about what do they want? What do you want? Counter offer, find a win-win, find that place where you're both stretching a little bit with what you're comfortable with. But really, especially now that my kids are on their own, what I want most for them is to be reflective around how they're using technology. I want them to feel like, oh God, look at my screen time today. Jeez, that doesn't feel good. I'm going to do something about it, right? I want them to have those skills. So again, and I remember one of the stories that I talk about with technology is, so when my son was just a little guy, I remember we had a box of cookies on the counter and we had many cookies, he and I. And then I said, you know what? I'm going to put these on top of the refrigerator. And he said, Mom, I can climb up and get those cookies. And I said, oh, babe, I know you can climb up and get those cookies. That's not why I put them up there. I put them up there so that we're not looking at them, because then it's going to be easier for us not to eat them. So this, again, I think well-intentioned, loving parents set up this cat and mouse game, especially around technology with their kids, which is putting kids in the space of, I got to sneak. Right? I'm going to, the workarounds. I mean, because there's endless workarounds. Nobody's perfected, how do we, other than delay, which I highly recommend, delay for sure. Other than,
You mean delay them getting the technology?
yes, absolutely.
Right.
There's no reason that our, I mean, and I feel like the more parents I talk to of elementary age kids, I feel like what happened for like they watched us and they're like, oh, geez, this is a runaway train. I feel like more and more parents today are getting on the bus around, screen-free childhood, which is great and very important. Another resource I would also offer, I had Jean Twangy on my show. She wrote a book called 10 Rules for Raising Kids in a High-Tech World. I think that's the name of the book. And it is the resource because it is practical, right? I loved The Anxious Generation and John Haidt's work, but it left me feeling like, okay, great, we're screwed. And then the question of, okay, great, I have all this information. I know it's bad. So what am I supposed to do? Jean's book actually says, here's 10 rules. And on the show, she was like, listen, if you can't do all the rules, pick the ones that work for your family. Start somewhere. There's got to be containment around technology. They do not have the capacity, nor do we, nor do the adults.
Right.
We do not have the capacity to manage ourselves with these things that have been designed to keep us busy with them. So we got to have limits. We got to have routines. And I think number one is just normalizing that we talk about technology. Right. And not from a place of you're doing bad and here's what I'm going to impose on you, but instead from a really reflective place. so that we're raising up kids who are reflective about their technology use. Am I using technology, or is technology using me?
Yeah, and I will say, because of my career, I started my career in broadcast
Oh,
television.
cool.
Um, so, I have been part of this technology journey. It's one of the things, the better things I did, I think, with the kids. I realized when they were really young, the movie Dinosaur came out, and it was the first animation where, feathers moved
Mm.
and it looked so real. And I thought, my gosh, I mean, I grew up with the
Yeah.
Flintstones.
Yeah.
Nobody thought, the animation was real, but now it looks so
Yeah.
good. How is a little child going to know the difference between imagination or not? And so I taught the kids, right? We talked about it all the
Mhm.
time, media
Yeah.
literacy. But, I taught them that anything that comes out of that box, that television, is somebody's
Yeah.
opinion. And it's not reality. Reality is what you see with your
Yeah.
eyes when you're outside and you do something. But when they were in that teen, phase, when they wanted to get cell phones, I told them I would buy them the chip and put the chip on my plan, but they had to buy their own
Mhm.
phone. So that limited how tech, the phone was. And then as more parental controls would come out, I had our Wi-Fi
Yeah.
on a timer. And I was really happy to see today that YouTube just came out with new
Great.
parental
Great.
controls.
Because
So,
that's a gateway.
right.
Yeah.
And coming from media, that's our
Yeah.
goal, is to try to get everybody more eyeballs, more
Yeah.
connection,
Sure, sure, sure.
and
Yeah, I love
and
limits.
so
I mean, and again, especially with my son, it was the phone shut off at a certain time and it came back on at another time. And, we both knew that he could work around. And actually, I had him on a show with me a couple of years ago. He was probably a junior in high school, and we were talking about screens. And he told me, he's like, Mom, I had a burner phone. I said, what? I was like, you're kidding. This is all on air. This is all part of the recording. I had no idea. He was like, yeah, I had this phone, but I was so stressed out that you were going to find out that I had to get rid of it. Right. And that's what we want. That's what we
right, a
want.
conscious,
Yes.
right,
Yes. Yes.
ownership of the
Yeah.
actions.
Yeah. 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 So I'm all for limits, but also not without that normalization of, we're talking about digital wellness and, and
Mhm.
health.
So, is there any sort of last tips as we start to wrap this up that you don't think we've covered, that you left on the table, you want to say?
I mean, I just think, I think that I just want to reiterate, like, if you're in a power struggle with your teen, one, it's so easy to go there. And I see you wanting what's best for them. And I understand that you come into parenting with a lot of wisdom to share, but power struggles require two people. And
Mhm.
if you want to get out of a power struggle, drop the rope, right? And instead get curious about your kid's experience. And it can sound like, I'm noticing we really are in a power struggle around curfew. I'm noticing we really get into a lot of power struggles around your phone, around driving, around school. Tell me about how that is for you. So I just
Mhm.
think that the more that we can be curious about our teens' experience instead of assuming that we know, I think there's so much ground we can cover with them, and it's so much more helpful and useful to them when we're willing to be curious and to validate that they are having their own separate reality and their own separate experience, and it's valid. It matters.
Right.
So be curious about that.
So I ask all guests of the show to give us a little mantra for the mom to hold on to as they're navigating this teen experience. What would you
So I
say to
have a
them?
one-liner that I love, and it came from a good friend of mine saying, "Okay, Case, like, I know you have this podcast." He doesn't listen to the podcast. He's my good friend, and he has a teenager. He was like, I know you got the pod and everything, but can you just tell me in a nutshell, what should I do?" So shout out to my friend Cam. And I said, Cam, don't make it worse. Don't make it worse. Like if you need a one-liner in any given moment, like don't make it worse. And I think that, fits with what you shared around don't bite. It just like there's so much that we add to. The angst is there.
Mm-hmm.
The train is rough. Don't
Mm-hmm.
make it worse.
Yeah. I like it.
Thank you.
So thank you, really for jumping into this conversation.
Yeah, thank you for inviting me. This was a lot of fun. Thank you, listeners, for tuning in. And if anyone has any questions or feedback, my email is casey@joyfulcourage.com. And I'm in charge of my email. I don't have a team that's reading my email, but so I will respond. So let me know what you need.
I want our listeners to know that we'll link to Casey's podcast, Joyful Courage, and her book, Joyful Courage, Calming the Drama and Taking Control of Your Parenting Journey, in our show notes and at the mothersofboys.life website. So if this podcast resonated and this episode resonated, please come find us on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, and LinkedIn. And be kind to yourself, moms, and you have got this. Promise.